The storm outside howled like a wounded beast, slamming icy wind against the stone walls of Thomas Whitaker's sprawling estate. Inside, silence pressed down heavier than the snow, broken only by the faint hum of a distant clock. Then came a knock, faint at first, then again, steady, insistent. The billionaire in his wheeled chair paused. Few dared visit his house anymore. When he finally opened the side door, a pale little girl no taller than his arms stood there, shivering, her coat frayed and thin, cheeks flushed raw with hunger. Her eyes lifted to his with startling steadiness. "I'm hungry. Do you have any leftovers?" she whispered. Thomas smirked, not with warmth, but with disdain. A billionaire, interrupted by a beggar child on his marble doorstep. He almost laughed aloud. Yet, even as mockery curled his lips, a chill deeper than winter entered his heart. Thomas did not close the door quietly. He swung it wide, allowing the bitter wind to whip the foyer. A wealthy neighbor, Donna Hargrove, passed the gates with her lapdog and caught sight of the ragged child. "Begging at your door now, Tom," she called mockingly through the gale. Thomas chuckled, loud enough for her to hear. He plucked a silver tray from the counter where a half-eaten roast had cooled. "Trade your dreams for scraps, eh?" he sneered, shoving the dish toward the girl. "Here's your miracle, cold bones." The girl clutched the food, her small hands trembling, but she did not flinch. She looked at him with quiet composure, her dignity sharper than any insult. Donna's cruel laugh carried into the night, echoing across the frozen lawn. Thomas shut the door, satisfied he had entertained his neighbor, unaware that the shame he felt was beginning to fester.
The girl had gone, and silence fell again inside the cavernous mansion. Thomas wheeled into the vast living room, where chandeliers gleamed coldly against lifeless paintings. He replayed the look in her eyes. No hatred, no begging wine, only that steady composure of hunger endured. He should have forgotten her, as he had forgotten countless petitioners before. Yet her gaze lingered, needling him through the hours. Mockery had always been his armor, sharper than any blade, but for the first time in decades, it rang hollow. He stared out at the storm and saw, reflected in the glass, not power, not wealth, but a hollow man hiding behind cruelty. His legs, useless for 20 years, ached with phantom shame. He scoffed, dismissing the unease, but even his own laughter cracked in his throat. That child had left nothing but a single flower of doubt blooming inside him. By morning, Thomas had convinced himself it was over, yet as the storm cleared, another knock stirred the air. At the door once more stood the same child, her clothes still threadbare, but her smile radiant. In her tiny hands lay a paper-wrapped wildflower, wilted but carefully protected. She held it out without hesitation. "Thank you for feeding me," she said softly. Thomas froze, stunned that instead of resentment or greed, the girl returned with gratitude. She did not ask for more. She did not look around in envy at the marble floors or the towering ceilings. She simply gave. A billionaire used to sycophants and schemers now sat speechless before a 6-year-old who asked for nothing but allowed him to see kindness again. Against his instincts, Thomas pulled the door wide and gestured her inside, muttering something he had not spoken in years. "Come in."
Moments later, another knock echoed, firm, decisive. A tall, weary woman appeared on the porch. Erin Tarker, the child's mother, eyes ringed with fatigue from long shifts, entered with protective fire. She introduced herself with polite firmness, insisting on boundaries. If her daughter Lily ever stepped foot in this house again, it would be under Erin's supervision. No hidden corners, no secrets, no favors left unpaid. Thomas, startled by her unflinching poise, nodded slowly. He led them through the kitchen,
each marble counter gleaming under cold light. Aaron's sharp gaze missed nothing. The medicine cabinet, the locked study, the emptiness of a mansion that held wealth but no warmth. She sat her daughter down at the long oak table, pulled out a simple cloth from her bag, and prepared a meal from the scraps Thomas had offered. In that moment, authority quietly shifted. Thomas was no longer the master. The soup Aaron ladled into a chipped bowl filled the room with steam. Lily cupped it with both hands, blowing gently before sipping. "Delicious, Mama," she whispered, and Thomas found himself leaning forward. He had dined on the finest courses of Paris, the rarest wines of Tuscany, yet this humble soup carried a richness foreign to him. For the first time in years, the mocking quip died in his throat. Aaron, noticing his stare, pushed a second bowl toward him without ceremony. He hesitated, then tasted. The warmth slid down like something more than broth. It was memory. It was comfort. He set the spoon down quickly, ashamed that gratitude had softened his chest. Across from him, Lily beamed. Thomas turned away, scolding himself. Billionaires did not eat soup from chipped bowls. Yet some fragile crack had formed inside the fortress he had built from bitterness.
While Thomas wrestled with his unease, the neighborhood sharpened its claws. Donna Hargrove wasted no time in whispering across dinner parties. Whitaker's finally lost it, feeding stray children like pets. Soon, the golf club rang with cruel laughter. What's next? Adoption drives at the mansion? Photos surfaced online, blurry images of Lily leaving the gates with leftovers. Headlines mocked the mighty CEO turned caretaker of paupers. For Thomas, mockery had once been a weapon. Now it boomeranged, cutting deeper than any wound. He sat in his study scrolling through the venom, every cruel post a mirror of the same contempt he had shown. But outside his door, Lily's quiet laugh rang as she sketched flowers with crayons on expensive parchment. The world mocked him for letting her in, yet within those walls, for the first time in decades, he wondered if he had stumbled onto real strength. Carol Benton, who had managed the Whitaker estate since Thomas's youth, returned from errands to find Lily curled in the armchair with crayons. Carol's lips thinned, her eyes cold with disdain. "Strays don't belong here," she muttered under her breath, but not quietly enough. Aaron's posture stiffened, though she held her silence. Carol carried dishes with clattering emphasis, each slam of porcelain a protest. Later that evening, Thomas overheard her on the phone. "He's letting outsiders in. They'll bleed him dry." Her words were sharp, soaked in class contempt. Yet instead of agreement, Thomas felt a hot flare of anger. For years, Carol's loyalty had been his anchor, but now her veiled insults cut not only Lily, but himself. He wheeled to the doorway and said nothing, only watched. For the first time, Carol looked unsettled under his gaze, as if she knew her hold on him was weakening. That night, while Aaron tidied the kitchen, Lily wandered back to Thomas's chair. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly, touching the stiff brace on his leg. He nearly barked a retort, but her innocence disarmed him. She pressed her tiny palm against his calf. Warmth spread slowly, not mystical, but undeniably real. A faint prickle flickered across his arch, a sensation absent for 20 years. He gasped, almost convincing himself it was imagination. Yet as Lily continued, he felt it again, sharper this time. He clenched the chair arms, stunned, terrified to believe. Aaron entered, her eyes widening at his expression. "We'll call the doctor tomorrow," she said firmly, refusing fantasy. Thomas nodded numbly, unable to confess that hope, dangerous, perilous hope, was rising in his chest. The girl he had mocked might have done what medicine had never accomplished, made him feel alive again. By dawn, Thomas summoned his physician of decades, but Aaron insisted on independent oversight.
"No one will accuse us of tampering," she declared. Dr. Emily Rhodes arrived, brisk and professional. Reflex hammers tapped, electrodes buzzed, charts filled. Her brow furrowed. "Unexpected responses," she admitted carefully. "Nothing conclusive, but unusual." Aaron demanded medication logs checked and outside experts brought in. Thomas agreed, shocking even himself. Never before had he shared control of his life so willingly. Yet as Lily sat quietly coloring in the corner, her presence lent him courage. For the first time in 20 years, he contemplated a possibility he had buried beneath layers of sarcasm and bitterness. A future where he might rise again. They had a pact now, not of miracles and fairy tales, but of tests, records, and truth. And for Thomas Whitaker, that was miracle enough to dare believing.
By midweek, whispers had turned into headlines. A grainy photo of Lily clutching a leftover container at the Whitaker gates spread across social feeds. The captions stung, from Forbes' cover to feeding urchins. Former business partners chimed in with smug remarks. "He's lost his edge, too soft." Thomas, who once relished society's praise, now sat scrolling through ridicule that bit sharper than any market loss. Yet as each cruel comment sank in, he could hear Lily's quiet giggles echoing from the drawing room. She and Aaron were building a blanket fort from his expensive throws, a fortress of laughter inside walls that had known only silence. The world mocked him as weak, yet somehow he felt stronger. What outsiders saw as humiliation, he began to sense as healing. Still, shadows gathered outside, because where gossip lives, ambition and betrayal are never far behind. One afternoon, a luxury car slid up to the mansion gates. Out stepped Diana Whitaker, Thomas's ex-wife, immaculate in pearls, her smile razor-thin. For years, she had kept her distance, embarrassed by the man who could no longer walk. Now the tabloids had dragged her back into the spotlight. She arrived, not with affection, but with a lawyer at her side. "For your protection," she claimed, implying Aaron and Lily were exploiting him. In truth, Diana scented opportunity. If she could prove manipulation, she might claw back access to the fortune she'd left behind. Thomas listened in silence, but inside him, anger flared. 20 years of shame had left him pliable before, but not now. Not after Lily's hand had sparked life in his legs. He saw Diana clearly, as someone who had left when he was weakest, now returning only to feast on rumor.
That evening, tension simmered. Aaron paced the kitchen, her fists clenched. Lily, sensing the unease, kept close to Thomas's chair. In the hall, Carol, the housekeeper, sharpened her tone. "Diana's right. They don't belong here." Her words cracked like whips. For Thomas, betrayal cut deepest from Carol, who had been his shadow since youth. "Protecting your legacy," she called it, but her disdain for Aaron's presence poisoned the air. The mansion, once a monument to isolation, now became a battleground of loyalty. Outside, cameras flashed at the gates. Inside, a family struggling to form was being pulled apart. Thomas retreated to his study, staring at the shelves of untouched law books and finance journals. All his wealth, all his knowledge, and yet he was powerless against gossip and suspicion. Or was he? A plan began to stir, something bold enough to silence both Diana and Carol. The night stretched long. Thomas wheeled himself into the quiet parlor where Lily had fallen asleep on the sofa, a flower clutched in her hand. He felt a pull in his chest stronger than pride. With trembling hands, he braced against the armrests and forced weight into his legs. Pain lanced up his spine, but for the first time, his knees locked. A quiver ran down, a pulse of life. He rose, an inch, then another, until he stood, trembling, gripping the chair back with white knuckles. His legs shook violently, but he had stood. Tears burned down his face, a storm 20 years withheld. Aaron rushed in, gasping at the sight. He collapsed back, but the proof remained. The impossible had begun. Somewhere deep, He realized the miracle wasn't charity or pity, it was belief, and that belief would be his weapon.
Days later, Erin heard hushed voices in the back garden. Curious, she crept closer. Carol's voice hissed through the winter air. "Diana, I've seen them. She cooks his meals, rearranges his schedule. They'll bleed him dry. I'll testify." Erin's stomach twisted. The housekeeper she had endured with quiet patience was feeding Diana lies. That night, she told Thomas. His face went white, fury trembling in his hands. Carol had been his confidant for decades, yet her loyalty had curdled into prejudice and resentment. He summoned her. "Is it true?" His voice was quiet but cutting. Carol faltered, then blurted, "I'm saving you from ruin." Thomas stared, seeing not a protector, but a jailer clinging to control. "No," he whispered, "you're saving your pride." The betrayal broke something final. Carol was dismissed, her suitcase heavy with 30 years of service and prejudice left behind. It came swiftly, a thick envelope, dropped at the gates by a courier, bearing Diana's name. Legal documents accused Erin of manipulation, Lily of undue influence, and Thomas himself of being unfit to manage his fortune. Freezing accounts, demanding court hearings, dragging every corner of his life into public spectacle. Headlines blared, "Whitaker Empire in Jeopardy, Child and Mother Accused of Exploitation." Thomas sat with the papers in his lap, rage battling despair. Erin wept quietly in the kitchen, Lily pressing flowers into her mother's hand. For Thomas, the humiliation was unbearable. Once mocked for his wheelchair, now mocked for kindness. Yet amid the storm, he felt again the faint stir in his legs, the fire Lily had rekindled. He clenched the papers, his jaw set. If Diana wanted war, she would not find a broken man. She would find a man reborn.
The courtroom overflowed with reporters. Diana swept in like royalty, her lawyers flanking her. Carol seated nearby as witness. Erin sat stiff, clutching Lily's hand. Thomas wheeled forward, the cameras devouring every angle. Diana's counsel thundered. Manipulation of a vulnerable man, false hope, a child pawned as miracle worker. Gasps rippled. Yet when asked, Lily's small voice rang clear. "I never took anything. I gave him flowers." Laughter snickered from the gallery, cruel and sharp. Thomas's fists clenched, his humiliation boiling. But as he stared at Lily, her innocence unshaken even before mockery, he felt strength rise. When the judge asked if he wished to respond, Thomas leaned forward. His voice, low but steady, carried across the room. "You mock a child's kindness. Yet kindness has done what medicine could not. My legs are waking." The chamber fell silent, a new current shifting the air. Ordered by the judge, independent doctors conducted tests in open court. Electrodes flashed, charts printed. To the astonishment of all, faint but undeniable signals showed renewed neural activity in Thomas's legs. One physician, renowned for skepticism, declared, "Medically remarkable, unprecedented." Diana scoffed, waving her hand. "Coincidence, temporary flare." But the evidence stood, hard, clinical, undeniable. Reporters scribbled furiously. For Thomas, vindication surged, but he was not finished. He pushed his chair back, gripping the handles. Erin gasped. Lily whispered, "You can do it." Before the entire court, Thomas pressed into his legs. Muscles quivered, knees locked, and slowly, he rose. A collective gasp thundered. 20 years of paralysis mocked, defied. Reporters dropped pens, cameras flashed endlessly. Thomas Whitaker stood, trembling but unbroken. The judge rapped the gavel, voice trembling. "This court recognizes what we all see. The miracle is real." By evening, the very papers that had mocked him now blared new headlines. "Billionaire stands after 20 years. Child's miracle?" Reporters who once scoffed now crowded the gates, pleading for interviews. Donna Hargrove, once gleeful at his humiliation, hid behind drawn curtains. Carol slunk from the neighborhood, her betrayal exposed. Diana fumed, her lawsuit crumbling before public awe.
Inside the mansion, laughter filled the air. Aaron wept as Thomas took shaky steps across the parlor, Lily steadying him with tiny hands. He stumbled, but each fall carried pride, not shame. For years, mockery had defined his life. Now, mockery itself bowed, silenced by truth. Neighbors who sneered sent flowers. Strangers wrote letters of apology. Thomas read them all with weary eyes, then tore them up. He no longer craved approval. His vindication was not the crowd, it was the miracle walking beside him, 6 years old and steadfast. That night, as candles flickered in the vast dining room, Thomas spoke softly to Aaron and Lily. The world mocked us. It will mock again. But we know truth. We know miracles are not magic. They are courage. Aaron squeezed his hand, her eyes still wet from the courtroom. Lily smiled sleepily, resting her head on his lap. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we'll practice walking again." Outside, winter pressed hard against the mansion, the wind rattling shutters. But inside, warmth glowed where there had once been only cold. For Thomas, it was more than recovery. It was redemption. A life reclaimed not by money, nor by pity, but by the smallest hand reaching out in hunger and returning with love. He looked across the table and made a silent vow. Never again would mockery define him. Only kindness and the courage to believe.
Humiliation burned through Diana's veins after the courtroom spectacle. Yet pride dies slowly. Her attorneys urged her to drop the case, but she refused, scheming for one last strike. Tabloids received carefully planted rumors that Aaron had staged the recovery, that Lily was coached to play angel, that Thomas's miracle was mere theater. Mockery surged again, harsher than ever. Desperate cripple claws for sympathy, sneered one gossip column. Thomas read it all in silence, his jaw hardening. He knew the world would not forgive easily, nor would Diana relent. But where once such cruelty had crushed him, now it fueled him. For he understood what they could not. This was no performance. Every trembling step he took mocked their lies louder than any headline. And soon, he vowed, Diana would face the truth not just in court, but in her own hollow heart. Each morning, Thomas pushed himself further. With Lily steadying one hand and Aaron the other, he practiced walking the length of the sunlit corridor. The mansion echoed with sounds it hadn't known in decades: shuffling steps, soft laughter, hopeful gasps. Doctors visited and confirmed what no one thought possible: genuine motor recovery. Unprecedented, they repeated, baffled yet awed. Aaron kept records, determined to document every step for when skeptics returned. Lily drew flowers on the charts, declaring them proof enough. In the evenings, Thomas sat by the fireplace, marveling not at his wealth, but at the tiny courage that had reawakened his body. They mocked me, he thought, but my body answers back louder than their laughter. Outside, Diana applauded her next move. Inside, the man she once abandoned was slowly reclaiming what she believed forever lost: his strength, his dignity, his power.
News of Thomas's progress spread beyond tabloids into serious journals. Case study of neurological recovery after 2 decades, read one headline. Invitations for interviews poured in, scientists and journalists alike demanding proof. But for every admirer, there were detractors. Online forums buzzed: fraud, hoax, paid actors. Anonymous letters slipped under the mansion gate. They'll bleed you dry, they always do. The words dripped venom. Aaron wept silently at night, fearing Lily's childhood was being poisoned by hatred. Yet Lily seemed untouched. Each morning, she bounded into Thomas's study with a new flower, declaring, "Today you'll walk farther." Her faith was unshaken, her laughter immune to scorn. Watching her, Thomas understood the truth. Cynicism belonged to the world outside, but within these walls, hope reigned. Still, he braced himself. For storms never gather without breaking, and he knew Diana's fury was far from finished. One Sunday morning, Thomas unfolded the paper, only to see his face splashed across the front page, beside the headline, "Miracle or Manipulation? Ex-wife claims exploitation." The article oozed with Carol's lies, portraying Aaron as a schemer and Lily as a puppet. It twisted every act of kindness into sinister motive. "Pathetic," sneered the column. "A crippled billionaire duped by a hungry child." Thomas's hands shook, not from weakness, but rage. He saw Erin's shoulders sag, her dignity crushed once again by words dripping with malice. Lily looked at him and asked softly, "Why do they hate us?" His heart broke, but his fury hardened. The world wanted to see him humiliated forever. They wanted to strip his miracle into mockery. But Thomas made a decision that moment. If Diana wanted war in the press, he would give them a story they could never deny.
The mansion gates swung open. Cameras lined the driveway as Thomas wheeled himself out, Aaron and Lily at his side. Silence rippled through the crowd as they saw him stand, slowly, trembling, but upright. Reporters gasped, flashes firing like lightning. 20 years in a chair, Thomas said firmly, and they called me weak, a fool, a man to be pitied. They mocked a child's hunger, a woman's dignity, and a miracle they cannot explain. Today I stand not for myself, but for them. He placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. Kindness gave me strength medicine never could. Mockery tried to break me, but mockery failed. The crowd erupted, half in awe, half in shock. That night, his speech replayed on every major network. For once, the world's laughter faltered, replaced by something he had not heard in decades: respect. The tide shifted violently. Public sympathy swung to Thomas, Aaron, and Lily. Online, strangers flooded them with support, shaming tabloids that had smeared them. Investors who once backed Diana withdrew, citing reputation risk. Even her lawyers quietly slipped away, unwilling to fight a losing battle. Alone, she called Thomas one last time. Her voice, once so sharp, cracked with desperation. "You've destroyed me," she hissed. He listened, silent, then replied softly, "No, Diana, you destroyed yourself the day you mocked kindness." The line went dead. That night, Diana disappeared from the headlines. For Thomas, the moment was bittersweet. She had once been his world. Now she was only a shadow of cruelty, fading under the weight of truth. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Let the past bury its dead. My future is here." Weeks later, Eleanor Whitaker, Thomas's estranged mother, returned. Her steps were slow, her eyes full of shame. She had once shared Diana's doubts, convinced Aaron and Lily were opportunists. But she had watched, from afar, as Thomas stood in public, as Lily's innocence silenced critics, as Aaron's quiet dignity endured storms. That day, she entered the mansion not with judgment, but with trembling apology. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I feared losing you again. I let my pride blind me." Thomas embraced her, his own tears falling freely. Aaron's eyes softened, and Lily leapt into Eleanor's arms without hesitation. In that fragile, glorious instant, 20 years of bitterness dissolved in delight. The Whitaker mansion, once a fortress of isolation, now pulsed with the fragile beginnings of family. For Thomas, forgiveness felt like the final step in his long, impossible journey. It happened on a golden spring morning. The sun spilled through wide windows, the air alive with birdsong. With Lily at his side, and Aaron watching, Thomas gripped the banister of the grand staircase.
Slowly, painfully, he lifted one foot, then another. Gasps filled the hall. His body trembled with every ounce of effort, but step by step, he ascended. At the landing, he turned, tears streaming, and looked down at Aaron and Lily. "I am whole," he whispered, his voice breaking. For them, the moment was sacred. No audience, no reporters, only truth. He collapsed into their arms, laughing and crying at once. In that fragile, glorious instant, 20 years of bitterness dissolved in delight. The miracle was not just movement, it was freedom, dignity, and the knowledge that no amount of mockery could ever chain him again.
In the months that followed, life reshaped itself. Thomas continued therapy, each day walking farther. Aaron managed the household with quiet strength. Lily turned the mansion's empty rooms into playgrounds of joy. For the first time, Thomas felt what he had been missing all along: family. Not guests, not caretakers, but people who chose him, not his wealth. Neighbors who once sneered now crossed the street to apologize. Flowers arrived daily, accompanied by notes, "Forgive our laughter." He accepted none of it, save the flowers, which he planted in Lily's garden. "Let them bloom," he told her. "Mockery dies, kindness grows." And as the blossoms filled the once barren grounds, so too did laughter, love, and life. The Whitaker estate was no longer a monument to emptiness. It was a home reborn. On a summer evening, Thomas gathered Aaron, Lily, and Eleanor on the balcony. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in crimson and gold. He rose without aid, standing tall for them all to see. 20 years ago, I lost everything, he said softly. Wealth, love, hope. I thought mockery was my fate. But one night, a hungry girl knocked at my door. And because I opened it, I found life again. Aaron wept quietly. Lily beamed. Eleanor clasped his hand. The mansion glowed with warmth it had never known. "This," Thomas said, gesturing to them, "is the only miracle I ever needed." And as stars pierced the twilight, laughter rose from the balcony. Not bitter, not mocking, but pure. For Thomas Whitaker had conquered not only paralysis, but the cruelty of a world that mocked kindness. The final word was his: hope.